Hello, everybody. It's been a while since we've done one of these, I know, and I know that my original plan was to do a year in television video every single month, but I figure, June, July, and August, I could usually combine into the summer of '89 for this particular thing, because mostly, the summer back then didn't really have all these shows that we have nowadays. They didn't have a whole lot of reality shows. Most of the new stuff that was on there were pilots, unsold pilots from these TV networks, and so every once in a while you get a show that did eventually go on to become a pilot that did go on to eventually become a series. Case in point with a couple of these shows that we're going to tackle here. We have some stuff to get to here, but yeah, the summer of 1989. It had a number of different things and a couple of notable TV shows making their debuts, but like I said before, most of the time it was usually just, unsold pilots, repeats of movies, specials, you name it. So I basically decided to just condense it down into one video. Then again, but also I was doing the Christmas in July videos in June, and also finishing up the Tomlin documentary. So that's why this has been condensed down into one video in the middle of the summertime. So I figured, do a full video for the summer of 1989. And we have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different TV events that happened in the summer of 1989. I say events because our first two are finals in both the National Basketball Association and the National Hockey League. And let's start off with the biggest one of the two, and that was the 1989 NBA Finals between the Los Angeles Lakers and the eventual winners, the Detroit Pistons.
One of the last two, and now they'll do it. World champs.
Yeah, this was a particularly critical history in the terms of the NBA Finals, because you gotta keep in mind that the 1980s were pretty much dominated not just by the Lakers, but also the Boston Celtics. I mean, every other year, one of these two teams was playing in the NBA Finals and winning a final. The only exception being was when, in the Lakers' case, they lost to the Philadelphia 76ers in 1983. And this was kind of the beginning of the turnaround for the new generation of the NBA taking shape, because the Detroit Pistons eventually swept the Lakers 4-0 in the NBA Finals. Joe DeMars became the MVP, and of course you had a cast for the Pistons that included Dennis Rodman, Isaiah Thomas, coached by Chuck Daly. This is even with the Lakers still having Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Magic Johnson. Case in point, in which Kareem Abdul-Jabbar actually retired from the NBA after this season in particular. But the Detroit Pistons dominated. They beat the Bulls in the Eastern Finals, and then the Lakers beat the Suns in their finals. So this is where they eventually met up, and it wasn't even close, man. I mean, the Lakers were dominated by the Pistons overall. The Lakers were getting up there. I mean, they had been in the finals for most of the decade overall, so it makes sense that if you have been in the finals long enough, sooner or later somebody's going to come and knock you down. And in this case, it was the bad boys of the Detroit Lions in general, and it would be the first of two times they would win the championships, because they would win again the following year. But, yeah, this was a historic matchup for a number of different reasons. It was kind of the beginning of the end of the Laker dynasty of the 80s, and the Pistons started to take shape into becoming a dominant threat for at least the next couple of years before the guys that they beat in the Eastern Conference Finals started to take their positions in the 1990s, but all in good time. We'll get to that later. So, there you go. The Detroit Pistons won the NBA Finals that year, and not too long after that, the Stanley Cup Finals had a new champion.
Here comes the siren. Here come the players. Champions. 1989. Well, Lanny has asked for the other two captains. They alternated with the C's and the A's, but Lanny McDonald, along with Tim Hunter and Jim Poplinski, accept the...
Yeah, remember the time when Canadian hockey teams made the Stanley Cup almost every time? I mean, this was a pretty big deal back then, but also important to note that this is actually the last time the Stanley Cup had two Canadian teams facing off against each other in the Stanley Cup. Usually it's been one way or the other, but in this case it was the Calgary Flames going up against the Montreal Canadiens, and they took it to 6 games, in which Calgary ended up winning it overall. I believe this was actually their second Stanley Cup championship, if I'm not mistaken. I take that back. It was their first time they won their Stanley Cup championship. And, Terry Crisp was the coach for that team. It featured 2 coaches making their first appearance, him and Pat Burns of Montreal. And for Crisp, it was his only appearance, with Burns returning one more time in 2003 when he led the Devils to their 3rd cup. And in the interim between these 2 matches, both teams had replaced their coaches. Crisp was hired to replace Bob Johnson after his departure from the 86-87 season, while Burns took over for 1986 Cup-winning coach Gene Perron after his 1988 firing. For Crisp, it was his 3rd Stanley Cup championship in his career. He had already won 2 as a player with the Philadelphia Flyers in 74 and 75. And following this series, Bob Gainey, Rick Green, and Lanny McDonald retired, while longtime defenseman Larry Robinson signed with the Los Angeles Kings, where he'd play the final 3 years of his career. So he got to play with Wayne Gretzky when he was traded over there. So yeah, Calgary ended up winning it in 6 games, 4-2. And Calgary. I believe that actually is their. Is it their only Stanley Cup, or did they win another one too? I can't remember. No, it was their only cup. It was the only cup they ever won. They had been into the Stanley Cup Finals 2 other times in '86 and 2004. So there you go. Calgary ended up winning the Stanley Cup, following the Detroit Pistons winning the NBA Finals. So those were the 2 big sporting events of the month. Now let's get to the scripted shows that were on TV at that time, because there was a couple of notable ones. Case in point with our first one, Shannon's Deal.
Jack Shannon was just a washed-up attorney. Still like lawyers, much more guys. But when they tried to buy him off, that's a lot of money. He took on the drug lords. It would destroy his city. Particularly the wire on this. Sometimes one man can make a difference.
This is like very nice.
It's Shannon's Deal next Sunday.
Created by the legendary John Sayles of 8 Men Out and Passion Fish fame. This is a show centering around a Philadelphia corporate lawyer named Jack Shannon, played by Jamie Sheridan, who lost his family and his job to a compulsive gambling habit. The saga of Shannon, who leads a prestigious law firm after years of being unhappy with the legal system and being forced to take his clients to court, after who subsequently opens his own low-rent practice, which was first explored in the highly rated 2-hour movie pilot, which aired on June 4th of 1989, and then repeated again on April 13th, 1990, ahead of the show's series premiere, which came just 3 days later on April 16th. The show also featured Elizabeth Pena in her first TV series since I Married Dora, and a young Jenny Lewis, who would later be seen in The Wizard that following year. So yeah, this was a very unique show in particular, mostly by the fact that, John Sayles is a great writer overall, and it was highly regarded in the industry for its level of writing, complex character development, and witty dramedy elements, but it's also remembered for the notable people who worked behind the scenes. As I mentioned, John Sayles, but also notable names such as Stan Rigaud, Tom Rickman, Louis Teague, Alan Arkish, Aaron Lipstadt, John Bynum. It was a show that ran for only 2 seasons in particular, when it eventually made it to TV series in general. And it was one of those shows where it never really found a great place to really find success overall. It was usually put on a time slot that wasn't really doing so well. It actually aired on Monday nights when it first started, and then when the show came back for a second season, they moved it to Tuesday nights, and it didn't really find it didn't really find an audience overall, and it kind of was cut down in its prime after only 14 episodes, along with the original TV show. But it did get a nomination for a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Achievement in Graphic Design and Title Sequence in 1991. But, I never really got to see it overall, so I can't really say if it's any good or not. But you also have a cast that includes Martin Ferrero and Miguel Ferrer, too. So it's a show that does have a lot of exciting people that makes me want to kind of check it out at some point. But let's be honest, the biggest show that came out in June of 1989 was one of HBO's first attempts into breaking into original territory. I mean, they had a couple of shows beforehand with First and 10, and I think there was another one too. I think Gary Shandling's show was a Showtime, if I'm not mistaken, but that show eventually made its way onto Fox, just like this show later made its way onto Fox in the 90s. That is, of course, Tales from the Crypt.
I remember when your mom said reading comic books would rot your brain. She was right. Tales from the Crypt, for all of you who didn't listen to Mommy.
Yeah, people never like the Crypt Keeper's puns, but you know what? I love them, man. I can't help it, man. This guy was awesome, and Tales from the Crypt was just such an amazing show. This was coming at the end of kind of this anthology revival that we were having around this time, because The Twilight Zone came back in the 80s, so did Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Steven Spielberg tried his hand at it with Amazing Stories that didn't pan out very well. It was a great show overall, but we even had some horror anthologies as well. You know, Freddy Krueger was the head of an anthology series, so was Jason Voorhees. There was also Tales from the Dark Side, which later made into Tales from the Dark Side, the movie. But Tales from the Crypt was definitely the show to beat at that time. I mean, it was a show that did not pull any punches and just went with it, man. I mean, this is a show where, you know, from the very beginning, that opening song, that opening alone is just so etched in your memory banks that as soon as you see it, you're just kind of like, okay, I'm ready to go, man. I mean, the opening alone is just pure magic, man. That great opening by Danny Elfman. But not only that, the show itself was a lot of fun. The show was hosted by the Crypt Keeper, voiced by John Kassir, who is a wisecracking corpse who introduces us into several different creepy stories in general. Not even creepy stories. There were creepy stories, but there were also just stories of very intriguing elements overall. It was basically a more raunchier version of the Twilight Zone. And again, it helps that you're on a network like HBO, where you could pretty much do whatever you want, and it didn't have to be censored by the standards and practices like other networks do. And so, yeah, this show was allowed to have stuff like graphic violence, strong language, explicit sex and nudity. And also, you got a ton of talent across the board here, not just from the people behind the scenes like Richard Donner, Walter Hill, Joel Silver, Robert Zemeckis, but episodes that would be featuring some of the biggest stars in Hollywood. Arnold Schwarzenegger directed and even appeared in the episode that he directed. But you also have all these different stars coming in here. They raised the gauntlet on everyone involved. Everybody from Adam West, you know, Anthony Michael Hall, Austin Pendleton, Ben Stein, Beverly D'Angelo, Bill Paxton, Brad Pitt, Brooke Shields, Demi Moore, Bruce Willis was in one, Tom Hanks was in one. I mean, they got pretty much everyone working in Hollywood between 1989 and 1996, and it was just such a fun show overall. I was just catching up on a couple of episodes again on IFC. I will say this: if you're watching it on IFC, tell me I'm not the only one that's seeing this. Does the show feel like it's moving at a much faster rate, like 60 frames per second, when you watch it on IFC? I've been, like I said, I was watching a couple of episodes recently, and I couldn't help but think that the show was moving way faster than usual. But I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's just me overall, but Tales from the Crypt pretty much went whenever it needed to go, and it became a big success, where it launched 2 successful spin-off movies for the big screen, a Saturday morning cartoon show for ABC, produced by the same company that put Care Bears out. It's just kind of like who would have guessed that Tales from the Crypt would be so successful that somebody would say, let's make a Saturday morning kids show. God, the late 80s and early 90s just didn't care what the rating was for something. We're gonna whore the shit out of this. I mean, that's why we got Rambo and RoboCop as an animated series around that time, for God's sakes. I mean, there was even a kids game show called Secrets of the Crypt Keeper's Haunted House, which is basically kind of like an equivalent to Legends of the Hidden Temple, except with Tales from the Crypt vibes to it. And yeah, like I said, it's currently on IFC. You can stream it on AMC Plus, I believe it's on there right now. But I mean, if you can find those DVDs out there, seek that show out, because it is a show that is so goddamn good, even after all these years. It's a show I can't recommend enough. I think most people out there have already seen it, but if you have not, definitely check out Tales from the Crypt, because it is definitely one of the most popular shows that came out in the summer of 1989. But the biggest show of 1989 was a show about nothing that suddenly became something. Let's take a look at that, shall we?
Well done, laundry.
Sure grabs the underwear. Come on, babe. Let's go.
It's a stand-up guy in an outrageous sitcom special, The Seinfeld Chronicles, after Night Court tonight.
Never heard of it. The Seinfeld Chronicles. That's right. This is the very first episode of Seinfeld, which premiered on July 5th, 1989, as it says in the promo, after a special episode of Night Court. It was written by Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld and directed by Art Wolf, and it's definitely a much different show than the show that would eventually become Seinfeld, one of the greatest shows of all time. And revolves around a fictionalized version of Seinfeld who is unsure about the romantic intentions of a woman he just met and frets about the meaning of her signals with his friend George, played by Jason Alexander, and his neighbor Cosmo Kessler. Yeah, that's right. He wasn't even named Cosmo Kramer in this. He was just named Kessler, played by Michael Richards. The two continue to talk about her after luncheon, and Jerry then receives a telephone call from Laura, who asks if she can stay overnight at his apartment. Jerry invites her, but is still unsure whether or not his visit is intended to be, her visit is intended to be romantic. Jerry and Laura eventually arrive at the airport. Laura then realizes a call, and when Laura gets off the phone, she tells Jerry, never get engaged. Jerry then realizes that he had no chance with Laura, but has already committed himself to an entire weekend with her. That's all that happens. That's the end of the show. And this was originally supposed to be a 90-minute TV special, and basically Seinfeld and David wrote a TV pilot. They felt that a show about nothing would fit better in a shorter format, and the storyline itself, as well as the main characters, are inspired by real-life events and people. And the NBC executives were unsure about what this show was going to be like, as Warren Littlefield would later say, all said, what the hell, let's try a pilot on this thing and see what happens. Because like I said, back in the day, back around this time, you had pilots showing up on TV with the possibilities that, hey, maybe someday these could eventually become TV shows. Case in point, what we just talked about with Shannon's deal. The test audiences, however, reacted extremely negative to the show, and although NBC would say that the broadcast would still air the broadcast to see how audiences and TV critics would react, the network had already decided not to pick up the show because of the test results. And the Seinfeld show was never heard from ever again. Of course it was heard from again. It actually was watched by nearly 11% of American households and actually did receive generally favorable reviews from critics who reacted with disappointment that NBC did not order a first season, and convinced that the show had potential and the support of positive reviews. The NBC executive Rick Ludwin, who also was the one that convinced them to hire Conan O'Brien to replace David Letterman, convinced them to pick Jay Leno over David Letterman for The Tonight Show. He managed to convince his superiors to order a 4-episode first season, which at the time was the smallest order in TV history, by offering a part of his own personal budget in return. And hey, it was a gamble that paid off big time. You don't usually hear about these shows where, they were basically risking, the people behind the shows were risking pretty much their jobs at this point. I mean, one of the great stories was All in the Family. When that show aired back in the 1970s, the head of CBS actually passed on the show, and it was an executive that said, give the show a chance, and the executive CBS said, okay, we'll go put it on the air, but if it fails, then your job is over. You're fired. You're going to get the hell out of here. And of course, All in the Family went on to become one of the most successful shows of all time, as did Seinfeld, going on to become one of the most successful shows of all time. But there were a lot of big things in this episode that were eventually changed over. Like I said before, Kramer's name was Kessler beforehand, and Elaine is nowhere to be found, as the lead female character was actually supposed to be Claire the waitress, played by Lee Garlington, who you may remember as the antagonist woman in Cobra. And yeah, if you watch this first episode, it's definitely a much different show than what Seinfeld would later become. And as the first episode, it's a much different show than what we'd see. The episode itself actually is very good, and it makes you wonder what those test audiences were thinking when they gave it bad reviews. In fact, I would have been curious to see what the show would have been had they went with this original format going forward, because it's actually pretty investing. A lot of the humor comes from the dialogue, which is very well written by David and Seinfeld. And I actually like how it doesn't come down to just one over-the-top thing. There's something of a compromise, and with situations like the episode Polls here, it would have been so easy to just turn Jerry into somebody who just wants to get laid, but the episode doesn't do that. It's a very good episode of comedic television, which blends both the stand-up element and the fictionalized storyline of Seinfeld into one seamless story that would eventually become the norm for the rest of the show. A lot of really funny moments, some interesting, noteworthy changes to the series that this would later become. It's a pretty good pilot overall, and sure, it wouldn't be the Seinfeld we've come to know and love, but it's an interesting twist on what the show could have been had somebody at NBC was willing to go with it, and judging by that episode, it would have been an interesting little bit of revisionist history to see what would have happened if this had become the show. Would Seinfeld have become the success that it was, or would it have just been gone after a couple seasons? We'll never really know, but we should be grateful for that. But it's one of those things which is kind of like, I would have been kind of interested to see what the direction of the show would have been like had they just stuck with the format that they had. But we would find out the next year how Seinfeld would do, as the show would air another season its first season in the summer of 1990. But during the summer of 1989, we had another more successful sitcom come on the air over at Nickelodeon, and that was Hey Dude. Ah, yes, the wonderful days of in stereo where available, and I love how that's part of the show's theme song. Like, you're not going to be able to take that off for any DVD or video reruns overall. But no, that's part of the show's theme song, no matter what. But Hey Dude was one of Nickelodeon's first successful live-action sitcoms, where you have a story about a group of kids on the fictional Bar None Ranch in Tucson, Arizona, and it portrays the life of the ranch owner, his son, their ranch hand, and 4 teenage summer employees. One of them played by Christine Taylor, who of course would later go on to become Mrs. Ben Stiller, and of course from the Brady Bunch movie as Marsha Brady. It also features David Lasher, who would go on to star in Blossom, as well as Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and David Brisbane, who is somebody who would later go on to star as Dr. Alexander Babcock on ER. And kind of like with other Nickelodeon's other shows, it had everything that you could ask for with a show like this. A catchy-ass theme song, a great cast overall, a good setup overall. Yeah, I mean, I've said before that I'm not a big Western person overall, but I've grown attached to it over the last couple of years, but you know, when this was coming on, I never really gave it a second thought overall, but as time has gone on, it's been off the air for so long, and you go back to it, like I remember when I was first watching it on the 90s or all that back in 2011, and it's just like, you know, this show does actually have some merits to it overall. This show does actually have some stuff there that I did really enjoy overall, that I just didn't see in general here. And it went on for 5 seasons over the course of 2 years, which is unusual for a show like this to have 5 seasons in general over 2 years. Usually you space that out once a year, but no, they just kept doing it. They just kept doing it for the course of the next 5 years in general, 5 seasons in general, which makes me kind of wonder if maybe they shot all the episodes all at once or something like that. But like a syndicated show would. But nevertheless, it's still a show that, hey, if you grew up with Nickelodeon, this was one of those must-see shows in general. When it came on TV, you just had to watch it. So yeah. So what more can you say about that? So let's go ahead and then jump into August of 1989. Now, this was a month that had a couple of notable shows, and there was also the idea of expanding the idea of a news magazine. I mean, 60 Minutes has been on the air at this point for 21 years. CBS had just launched another popular news magazine in 48 hours, and ABC, of course, had 2020. So NBC thought they had to get into the game. So what did they do this with? Get Maria Shriver, Chuck Schumer, and somebody else that I'm not too familiar with from NBC News to do a new news magazine show called Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow.
1 week from tonight on NBC, the past, present, and future will come together in a totally new news hour with Maria Shriver, Mary Alice Williams, and Chuck Scarborough. Now there are 3 sides to every story: yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Needless to say, this show didn't really last that long to have a tomorrow, because it was gone after a couple months on the air, and actually only had 3. It was a monthly show. It wasn't like a show that was airing weekly in general. They originally were going to do 4 installments, but the last one was set to air in November of 1989. But then they axed it when the show was not doing so well in the ratings overall. And by the way, that third person was Mary Alice Williams. And the show in general was using recreations under its new guise, but no New Division employees will be involved in it. And it was a show where they were basically using recreations of news events and transferring them to the entertainment division. It's one show that uses that technique. The use of recreations by network news divisions has come under heavy fire, particularly from former TV news executives who complain that dramatizing the news events distorts the truth and jeopardizes journalistic credibility. Oh, if they only knew what was going to happen nearly 40 years later. This was one of those shows that was trying to change the game in terms of how to do the news in general. But needless to say, that didn't really work out in the long run overall. But of course, Maria Shriver and Chuck Schumer did go on to have long careers in NBC News. The show itself did not, though. It's one of those shows that's really hard to find a whole lot of information on in particular, so I can't really get a good grasp on what the show was about in general, because I've never seen it before. But the idea overall might have been intriguing overall, but again, the whole idea of trying to use news as a sort of entertainment is as part of is kind of dings up journalistic integrity. But again, imagine what these people would think 40 years later of how the news would change forever, of course, especially with the current administration. However, there was one new primetime news magazine show that was on the air around that time, and the title of it was Primetime Live.
Is Primetime Live. Now Diane Sawyer and Sam Donaldson.
Well, good evening and welcome to the first Primetime Live. Sam and I are delighted to be here at last, and we hope we're going to see a lot of you on Thursday nights, because we plan to be traveling the world, exploring the news of the week. We should tell you right at the outset that from week to week, this broadcast is going to change as we ask questions, drop in on locations around the world, bring you investigative reports, and introduce you to people we think you're going to want to meet. And because it is live, please bear with us if we're surprised along the way, perhaps as surprised as you.
Primetime Live was easily the more successful news magazine debuting in August of 1989. It featured Sam Donaldson and Diane Sawyer, who was just coming off of CBS, or time at CBS News, making the move over to here. The first episode of the show featured interviews with Roseanne Barr, a piece on Middle East hostage crisis reported by Chris Wallace, who of course would later go on to work at both Fox News and CNN. Donaldson and Sawyer would allow audience members to comment on the program and ask questions of the guests, who were usually interviewed live via satellite or in studio, a practice that resulted in many technical difficulties and easy satirization on Saturday Night Live. Internal conflicts between Sawyer and Donaldson later led them to be separated and the audience eliminated. However, the program has always had some live elements when broadcasted as Primetime Live, generally consisting of Donaldson reading the opening remarks of packaged stories and the opening title as Primetime Live, like it's literally live in capitalizations, it's like they wanted to wake you up after you hear the title. Welcome to Primetime Live! Oh, jeez! Like that type of thing. Over time, live interviews were de-emphasized and hidden camera investigations began to occupy more of the schedule. In fact, the show would eventually launch a more successful spin-off in Primetime, What Would You Do?, which is still airing to this very day. The show has been canceled several times. In 1998, they canceled it and combined it with 2020, and then they did eventually air a short-lived continuation of the show called 2020 Downtown, aka Primetime Monday. And the show eventually did come back in 2004 and ran for a couple more seasons until it was finally canceled for good in 2012 after 23 seasons on the air. It has been known to have some scandals involved in it, such as the lawsuit with Food Lion, where one hidden camera investigation of southeastern U.S. grocery chain Food Lion backfired when Food Lion sued ABC. They sued them for trespassing and breach of loyalty, claiming that the report was produced under deceptive pretenses, and ABC employees hired by Food Lion wearing hidden cameras filmed other Food Lion employees without following proper notification procedures. Food Lion did not sue for libel, and the one-year statute of limitations had already run by the time it received all the footage shot by ABC, and prior to receiving the footage. Its attorneys believed it would have been difficult to prove that ABC acted with actual malice, and a jury awarded Food Lion $5.5 million, but later appeals by the ABC to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals resulted in the damage reduced to $2. Jesus Christ. How do you go from $5.5 million to $2? I mean, that's like something that would be like something that a gambler, like these gambling channels like Wild. Imagine if Vegas Matt goes into a Vegas casino and he's just like, okay, we're going to play with $5.5 million on this machine. We're going to do $10,000 to spend, something like that. And by the end, it's just like, oh, we ended up with $2, but we still had a lot of fun. Yeah, I don't think ABC was having that. I don't think Food Lion was having a lot of fun thinking that they were going to get $5.5 million, and you get it reduced to $2. It was like, and then it becomes the Curtis Armstrong character in Better Off Dead. $2, I want my $2. Was that even Curtis Armstrong that did that? There was a character in Better Off Dead where, they were just like, I want my $2. I can't remember what it was. I haven't seen that movie in a while, though, but I do remember a character doing that. But anyway, the scandal caused significant damage to Food Lion's business operations, leading to the closures of recently opened stores in Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Delaware, and Pennsylvania, affecting their plans for for future expansion, all while generating negative media attention and financial losses for the company. It's funny because I've actually been to a Food Lion a couple times in Ocean City in North Carolina. They're still around. They're just not as they're obviously not as big as they used to be. But yeah, that's one of the big scandals that came from this overall. But nevertheless, Primetime Live was one of the more successful news magazines on the air. So while NBC didn't have success then, they would definitely have some success a couple years later with another attempt at the news magazine in Dateline. But we'll get to that in 1992. But in the meantime, let's go back to NBC and take a look at another notable show that made its debut in August of 1989, and that is
News in Session on Saturday morning.
We're not going to study, we're going to party!
It's a lesson in laughter, of course, and all new Saved by the Bell tomorrow.
the show that literally changed the game for Saturday morning television forever. Now, keep in mind, if you're too young to remember what pre-August 1989 was like, it was dominated heavily by Saturday morning cartoons. I mean, this was a time when Bugs Bunny, the Ghostbusters, Alvin and the Chipmunks, Winnie the Pooh, Garfield, Muppet Babies, Smurfs, that was their time in general. So somebody taking a chance on putting a live-action show dedicated with teens as the focal point of it was a pretty risky gamble overall. And yeah, Saved by the Bell didn't really get off to the strongest start overall, but it did eventually go on to become a success and did find eventually its cult following. This was, of course, a reboot of the Disney Channel series Good Morning, Miss Bliss, which aired 2 years prior, featuring Haley Mills, and features a group of high school friends and their principal at the fictional Bayside High School in Los Angeles. The kids being played by Mark Paul Gosselaar, Mario Lopez, Dustin Diamond, Tiffany Amber Thiessen, Elizabeth Berkley, and Laura Voorhees, along with their principal, played by Dennis Haskins. And primarily focusing on lighthearted comedic situations, it also did tackle some notable serious issues, such as drug use. Everyone remembers Jessie's taking the pills so she can sing better, and her going like, "I'm so excited, I'm so scared," like that type of stuff. You know, driving under the influence, homelessness, remarriage, death, women's rights, environmental issues. There was literally an episode where Duck got killed because they were protesting the use of oil and all that type of stuff. I mean, this show did take a lot of risks overall. It's a show kind of like Full House, where I was never really the biggest fan of it as a kid, but I will admit as time has gone on, I do see more of the merit of it overall. I did remember watching the show when I woke up. This was a show that woke me up every morning when it was airing on TBS all the time, because it was on there for a long, long time before it eventually made its way off of there. But that was the show that woke me up in the morning when I had to get ready for school that day on TBS when it was on weekdays. But of course, a lot of these actors wanted to become big stars. Saved by the Bell became a big thing, spawning a franchise of numerous other shows, including what would have been a primetime spin-off in the college years, which didn't last very long. But the reboot version of The New Class actually ended up going on longer than the original Saved by the Bell did, even though that show in particular was not well received at all. And it still went on for 7 seasons. And the original Saved by the Bell, of course, did spawn 2 successful TV movies with Hawaiian Style and Wedding in Las Vegas, and is still seen by most people as a show that is still very reminiscent to them, even though it has been nearly 40 years. I mean, just as I'm recording this now, there's this new promotion going on with General Mills Foods where they're tying in with Saved by the Bell. So I mean, it's still a popular draw even after all this time. And hey, it's all right because we're Saved by the Bell, and it's a show that still remains relevant even to this very day. What can you say? What more can you say, man? Except it's all right because we're Saved by the Bell. So let's go ahead now and move on to the last thing I have here from the summer of 1989. A show that was a pilot that didn't turn out to be successful in terms of getting a series, but did eventually become successful in another domain. Let's talk about LA Takedown.
Meet LA's finest.
That lawyer sucks.
He works overtime on crime, leaving room for little else.
What happens out here is my whole world.
Now he's caught between a woman who wants him.
What is our life together, pit stop?
A man he wants to take down.
You do what you do best, try to stop guys like me.
For the first time anywhere, LA Takedown.
It's also been called other things such as LA Crime Wave and Made in LA, and it was originally filmed as a pilot for an NBC television series and was reworked and aired as a standalone TV film if the series was not picked up. What's notable about this is that it's written and directed by Michael Mann, so I guess you could say that this was NBC asking Michael Mann to deliver another style hit like they had with Miami Vice, and what they tried to do with Private Eye with Dennis Farina, which didn't really go anywhere. Was it Private Eye or Crime Story? It was one of those two. Both of those shows were trying to copy they were trying to copy the idea of Miami Vice's success in general here. Let me see if I can remember which one it was. Where is it? Crime Story was what it was. Private Eye was not involved with Michael Mann, but it did feature Dennis Farina in there. But LA Takedown is a story where you have Vincent Hanna, a detective on the hunt for professional criminal Patrick McLaurin, played by Alex MacArthur. Scott Plank played Vincent Hanna, and the story was based on the real-life investigation of Chicago criminal Neil McCauley. Now, some of those names might sound familiar to you, like Vincent Hanna and Patrick McLaurin. That was simply because that they were both played by one of them, Vincent Hanna, was a character in Michael Mann's Heat in 1995. In fact, this show became the basis for the movie Heat, and eventually that film went eventually to become what is now considered to be a crime classic that featured Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. So it's very interesting to go back and look at this after seeing Heat as many times as I have to see what this show eventually was. You also have a cast that included Michael Rooker as Detective Bosco, and characters played by Xander Berkeley, Peter Dobson, Laura Harrington, Kerry Harayoko Tagawawa, and a lot of the main cast appeared as guest stars in both Michael Mann's other shows, Miami Vice and Crime Story. And it was a very sleek and unique show for its time, but unfortunately the series just never really got off the ground in general. And mostly it was simply because NBC wanted a new lead actor, but Mann never wanted that. So NBC eventually rejected the show, and the pilot eventually went on to be lost in the shadows up until Heat came out, and basically was remade into that movie. So it was a very intriguing idea overall. It would have made for a very interesting TV series had they actually gone through with it in general. And, it's kind of like when you watch Michael Mann's version of Hannibal Lecter with Manhunter. It's a very unique approach to what we know as the norm now with the Silence of the Lambs with Manhunter. This was the basis for Heat, and it's very interesting to see how Heat came from this. So it's a very interesting concept overall. So there you go. That's my thoughts on LA Takedown. And that is going to wrap up the summer of 1989 in the year of television. Now, September of 1989 is going to be next up. That'll be coming up, of course, in September, where we'll take a look at all the new shows they're doing, because we're going to have a lot of new programs. Some that will become successful, others not so much, but we'll delve into all of them. I don't have the list with me right now, but we're going to get to those shows as we get to the fall of 1989 season. So, thank you for coming back to this. I know it's been a couple months since I did the last one, but I felt like kind of combining them all into one video because it was only about 10 things in particular here. So I figured why not just make a full video on it. So if you did enjoy this, hit the like button, subscribe button, notification button. Let me know you want to see more. And if you want to see more, check out some of the other videos we've done with our playlist, and also the previous one too for May of 1989. And I'll see you guys in September. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.